The shark movie genre has experienced an unprecedented resurgence in recent years, with streaming platforms and studios churning out aquatic thrillers at a pace that would make even Steven Spielberg's head spin. Under Paris, Deep Water, Thrash, Chum, the shark movies come so thick and fast these days, there's scarcely any time between them to deem it safe to go back in the water. This proliferation of shark-centric cinema has transformed what was once a specialized subgenre into a streaming staple, with each new entry attempting to find fresh waters to navigate within an increasingly crowded ocean of content. That said, if this recent run of films is to be believed, regular old beaches are fine these days. The traditional setting of Jaws and its countless imitators has given way to increasingly inventive locations. Seems the toothy predators are increasingly seeking less obvious locations to graze on wet human flesh, a mid-Pacific plane crash site, the City of Lights, and now, in The Devil's Mouth, a dark, dank, tight-squeeze cave in idyllic coastal Thailand. This evolution in setting reflects both the creative challenges facing filmmakers working within a well-established formula and the genre's inherent flexibility in adapting to new environments while maintaining its core thrills. The premise: vacation horror meets underwater terror. This claustrophobic danger zone brings a smidge of novelty to director Jeff Wadlow's aquatic thriller, but the formula is otherwise familiar. 5 hot young things on vacation, 1 bull shark very much in business mode, and a pecking order that most viewers can guess 5 minutes in. The director, known for his work on horror properties like Truth or Dare, and the aforementioned Fantasy Island reboot, brings his signature style of elevated B-movie sensibilities to this underwater adventure, though with decidedly mixed results. The film's setup follows a well-worn path in the survival horror playbook. A group of recent college graduates embark on what should be the trip of a lifetime to Thailand's stunning coastline. The crystalline waters, limestone cliffs, and hidden cave systems of the Thai coast provide a visually stunning backdrop that the film exploits effectively in its opening sequences. The production clearly benefited from genuine location shooting, with the natural beauty of Southeast Asia providing an authentic sense of place that studio tank work simply cannot replicate. The streaming dilemma: big screen thrills on small screens. It's odd that the shark movie has lately joined the romantic comedy in the ranks of genres most favored for straight-to-streaming fodder, since its pleasures, from Jaws onwards, have traditionally been communal, cinematic ones. The theatrical experience has always been integral to the shark movie's impact: the collective gasp of an audience, the shared tension of not knowing when the predator will strike, the primal scream that ripples through a packed theater when those jaws finally snap shut on an unsuspecting victim. These are experiences designed for the big screen, where scale, sound design, and the immersive darkness of a cinema create the perfect conditions for terror. From the safety of your sofa, a great white jump scare just doesn't land in quite the same way. The home viewing environment, with its distractions, ambient lighting, and smaller screen real estate, inherently diminishes the visceral impact of creature feature thrills. A Prime Video release, The Devil's Mouth, sometimes feels ill-suited to the small screen, given the frequently squint-inducing murkiness of its setting. The cave environments, while conceptually interesting, translate poorly to home viewing, where the nuances of underwater cinematography and the subtle play of light through water are often lost to compression artifacts and the limitations of consumer-grade displays. On the other hand, the very lax progression of Asia Gabel and Myung-Jo Wessner's Blacklist featured script feels tailored to the requirements of second-screen viewing, with character tensions brewing slowly and repetitively between sporadic feeding frenzies. The screenplay, which earned recognition on the prestigious Blacklist of Best Unproduced Screenplays, perhaps read better on the page than it plays on screen. The writers structure the narrative with extended dialogue sequences that allow viewers to check their phones or engage in other activities without missing crucial plot developments, a feature or bug, depending on your perspective on modern streaming content consumption. Character dynamics: Mean Girls meet Shark Week. If the dialogue and characterization never rise above the pedestrian, however, those tensions do at least bring some malicious rooting interest to the essential survival drama. The film's greatest asset isn't its titular predator but rather the interpersonal conflicts that simmer and occasionally boil over among its human characters. This is where The Devil's Mouth distinguishes itself somewhat from the pack, investing genuine time and effort into establishing character relationships that feel recognizable, if not particularly deep. With a strain of toxic friction evident from the get-go between nice girl protagonist Sarah Kathryn Newton and her narcissistic BFF Max Lana Condor, a self-declared CEO of fun, on their luxury post-graduation vacation, the film establishes its central conflict early. Newton, fresh from high-profile roles in Freaky and Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, brings a grounded vulnerability to Sarah that serves the character well. She portrays Sarah as fundamentally decent but perhaps too accommodating, someone who has allowed herself to be diminished by a friendship that has long since become one-sided. Both stars are better than their thin roles require them to be, with Condor clearly enjoying an opportunity to spike her wholesome, to all the boys, star persona a bit. The actress, who built her career playing sweethearts in teen romance films, attacks the role of Max with evident relish. Her Max is performatively carefree, the kind of person who weaponises fun, using spontaneity and adventure as tools of control rather than genuine expressions of joy. Condor's performance suggests depths that the screenplay doesn't quite explore, hints of insecurity beneath the confident exterior, suggestions of why Max might need to position herself as the center of attention at all times. Perhaps her young fans will resist how blatantly the film's sympathies are stacked in Sarah's favor. The narrative makes no secret of which character we're meant to support, occasionally to its own detriment. A more balanced approach to these competing personalities might have generated more complex moral dimensions to the survival scenario. As it stands, the film's perspective is clear from the opening scenes, telegraphing eventual fates with little subtlety. Or perhaps not, Sarah has a pretty rough time of it from the start. The unpaired fifth wheel on what is otherwise a lovey-dovey couple's trip, with Max and mutual college friend Adrian Tommy Rose accompanied by their respective, equally bland boyfriends James Nico Hiraga and Greg Gavin Casaleno. Sarah is quite literally an afterthought when, at the end of a day's yacht hire in a picturesque cove, the other four set sail while she's still in the water, leaving her at the mercy of a smack of jellyfish. This early sequence establishes both Sarah's social position within the group and the film's willingness to explore the casual cruelties that can exist even among supposed friends. The yacht abandonment isn't malicious, exactly, it's thoughtlessness, the kind of oversight that happens when someone simply doesn't register on your radar as important. For Sarah, this moment of being literally left behind crystallizes the emotional truth of her position in this friend group. Cue an initial sea creature attack less bloody than those to come, but perhaps the film's most eerily and alarmingly constructed set piece. The jellyfish sequence deserves special mention for its effectiveness in generating dread without relying on gore or jump scares. Director Wadlow and cinematographer James Neist create a genuinely unsettling visual of translucent bodies drifting through the water, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Sarah's panic as she realizes she's surrounded, the others too far away to help, plays as both literal danger and metaphor for her broader situation. The supporting characters, Adrian, James, and Greg, remain frustratingly underdeveloped throughout. Tommy Rose's Adrian exists primarily as a buffer between Sarah and Max, occasionally mediating but never quite picking a side. Nico Hiraga, a standout in films like Booksmart, is given little to work with as James, who registers mainly as Max's enabler and occasional voice of reason. Gavin Casaleno's Greg receives perhaps the shortest shrift, functioning more as a plot device than a fully realized character. Into the caves, where horror takes hold. A cursory apology from Max, "I'm trying to be accountable here," she says, unconvincingly doesn't quite smooth the waters between the two by the time of the group's next adventure. This line delivery from Condor is particularly effective, the words of accountability paired with a tone that suggests anything but. Max's apology is performative, a social obligation checked off rather than a genuine expression of remorse. It's a small moment that effectively characterizes Max's approach to relationships and foreshadows how her behavior will endanger the group in more serious ways. A remote coastal cave swimming expedition led by local guide Watt, the White Lotus, star Tame Thapthimthong, becomes the setting for the film's main action. Thapthimthong, who gained recognition for his work in the acclaimed HBO series, brings dignity and competence to a role that could easily have been reduced to stereotype. Watt is established as a professional, someone who knows these waters and caves intimately, who understands the risks and respects the environment. His expertise becomes a crucial element in the film's underlying commentary on tourism and entitlement. A cautionary tale tone soon sets in as the entitled Americans, led by Max, repeatedly overrule Watt's native expertise. This dynamic, wealthy tourists dismissing local knowledge in favor of their own desires, provides The Devil's Mouth with its most pointed social commentary. The film doesn't belabor this theme, but it's present throughout, adding layers to what might otherwise be a straightforward survival scenario. When the group insists on exploring deeper, more dangerous caves against Watt's recommendations, they're not just making poor choices about personal safety, they're embodying a larger pattern of Western tourists treating foreign destinations as playgrounds designed solely for their entertainment. The safer cave route he recommends is marked on the map in green, the one they choose is marked in red. How many more flags do you need? The visual symbolism here is almost comically obvious, yet it effectively underscores the group's willful ignorance. The film presents us with characters who have all the information necessary to make good decisions but choose otherwise, driven by ego, FOMO, and the compulsion to maximize every experience for social media content. You can hardly blame him for leaving them to their fate when, several caves in, ravaged remains float to the surface, followed in short order by the dreaded fin slicing through the water. Watt's departure from the narrative feels both justified and slightly underdeveloped. The screenplay might have benefited from giving him more agency in this decision or exploring his perspective more thoroughly. As it stands, he essentially vanishes from the story, which serves the plot's needs but feels somewhat unsatisfying from a character standpoint. The shark, an underutilized antagonist. How did the beast find its way into these cramped quarters? I don't think this is something we need to figure out right now, says one of the guys, and fair enough, even if that rather lets the screenwriters off the hook. This moment of self-aware dialogue acknowledges the logical questions viewers might have without actually addressing them. It's a technique that can work when deployed sparingly. Sometimes genre films benefit from not overthinking their premises, but it does feel like a missed opportunity to add texture to the world building. Bull sharks, the species featured in the film, are actually known for their ability to tolerate fresh water and navigate into unexpected areas, which makes them a more plausible choice for a cave-based thriller than the great whites typically featured in shark movies. The film might have benefited from incorporating more factual information about bull shark behavior, both to satisfy curious viewers and to enhance the realism of the scenario. A more immediate priority is navigating a route out of this cave network, with the shark, given limited room to roam, tailing them at every turn. The concept of a shark in confined spaces is inherently intriguing, inverting the usual dynamics of shark attack scenarios. Rather than the vast emptiness of the open ocean, where the predator could come from any direction, the caves limit both the characters and the shark's movement options. This should create a different type of tension, more chess match than random attack. Needless to say, not everyone's going to make it out alive. The film follows the genre convention of the escalating body count, though it's worth noting that The Devil's Mouth shows some restraint in this regard. Not every character death happens on-screen, and the progression of attacks is paced to maintain suspense rather than simply shocking the audience with rapid-fire kills. Technical execution. Atmosphere over accuracy. The panic-inducing narrowness of the potential escape routes make a change from the genre's usual spatial dynamics, with Wadlow recycling some of the atmospherics from his 2020 Fantasy Island film, minus the fantasy, and D.P. James Neist exploiting those most effectively in a couple of extended, suitably suffocating underwater set pieces. The film's strongest sequences occur when it fully commits to the claustrophobic potential of its setting. Neist's cinematography deserves particular praise in these moments. Shooting underwater in confined spaces presents enormous technical challenges, from lighting to camera movement to ensuring the safety of cast and crew. The sequences where characters must navigate tight passages, their bodies barely fitting through gaps in the rock, generate genuine anxiety. The camera work here emphasizes the physical restriction, often positioning the lens to show rock walls pressing in from all sides, water clouded with sediment, and only the faintest suggestions of light indicating potential exits. The production design team created or identified cave systems that feel authentically dangerous. Unlike some survival thrillers that feature obviously safe studio environments dressed to look hazardous, The Devil's Mouth benefits from locations that convey real risk. The rough texture of the cave walls, the unpredictable formations that create dead ends and hidden pockets, and the varying depths of water all contribute to a setting that feels unconquered and indifferent to human presence. Sound design plays a crucial role in the cave sequences. The muffled quality of underwater sound, the echo of voices in enclosed spaces.
However, it's the shark's appearances, surprisingly, that lack bite. Here we arrive at the devil's mouth's most significant shortcoming. After investing so much effort in creating a compelling setting and establishing character dynamics, the film fumbles when it comes to its marquee attraction. The shark, which should be a terrifying and memorable antagonist, never achieves the presence necessary to elevate the film into the upper tier of creature features. Denied a point of view or much in the way of a close-up, the CG killer never feels a particularly distinctive or palpable presence. This represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes movie sharks effective. From Jaws onward, the best shark films have understood that the predator must be more than just an obstacle. It needs to be a character with its own presence and personality. Spielberg's decision to show the shark sparingly wasn't just about hiding technical limitations, it was about building the creature into something larger than life through suggestion and selective revelation. The Devil's Mouth takes the opposite approach, showing the shark frequently but without impact. The CG work is competent from a technical standpoint. The shark moves realistically through the water, its proportions are accurate, but it never feels present in the space with the actors. There's a weightlessness to the digital creation, a lack of physical interaction with the environment that marks it as an effect rather than a tangible threat. While its lunges take on a fairly predictable pattern, further diminishing the impact. After the first couple of attacks, viewers can anticipate when the shark will strike based on pacing cues and character positioning. The film falls into a rhythm of tense dialogue, character moving through water, sudden appearance of shark, brief struggle, escape or death, repeat. This pattern becomes numbing rather than exciting, reducing what should be peak tension moments to routine plot beats. Violence and restraint, a missed opportunity. The gore, meanwhile, is unexpectedly discreet, which is a strange place for the film to exercise subtlety. Modern shark films exist on a spectrum from the relatively restrained to the gleefully excessive, and there's no inherently correct approach. However, The Devil's Mouth seems uncertain about where it wants to land on this spectrum, resulting in violence that feels sanitized without the conviction of purposeful restraint. A washed-up sea turtle with a cartoon-style bite taken out of it is the most visceral sight here, and the most saddening. This image, a classic semicircular shark bite removed from the turtle's shell, is a B-movie staple, signaling danger through environmental storytelling rather than direct attack. It's effective in its way, generating sympathy and establishing the shark's presence. The film's decision to make this one of its most graphic images, however, speaks to an overall squeamishness about depicting violence against human characters. The human bait, on the other hand, have your fill, buddy. This flippant reaction is almost invited by the film's handling of its less sympathetic characters. When the screenplay has worked to make certain characters unlikable, their eventual demise should provide catharsis. However, the discretion with which these deaths are filmed undercuts that release. We're positioned to want certain characters to face consequences, but when those consequences arrive, they're filmed with such restraint that the satisfaction is muted. To fully appreciate The Devil's Mouth and its particular strengths and weaknesses, it's valuable to consider it within the broader context of contemporary shark cinema. The 2020s have witnessed an remarkable proliferation of shark-themed content, driven largely by streaming platforms, appetite for genre content that can attract audiences without requiring significant marketing spends or theatrical releases. Films like Under Paris have taken sharks to unexpected urban environments, exploring how these predators might adapt to human spaces. Deep Water and similar titles have focused on sharks as manifestations of environmental revenge, with human disruption of marine ecosystems creating the conditions for predatory encounters. Thrash and Chum represent the more exploitation-oriented end of the spectrum, embracing B-movie sensibilities and delivering exactly what their titles promise. What unites these diverse entries is their recognition that the straightforward beach attack scenario has been exhausted. Jaws and its immediate successors mined rich terror from the violation of recreational spaces, the beach, the place of leisure and pleasure, revealed as hunting ground. Modern shark films must find new angles, whether through setting, character dynamics, or thematic concerns. The Devil's Mouth deserves credit for its attempt to find fresh water. The cave setting genuinely distinguishes it from most shark cinema, creating spatial dynamics that generate novel forms of tension. The character work, while not exceptional, exceeds the bare minimum of many genre films, providing interpersonal conflicts that give the survival scenario emotional texture. Young actors navigating thin material. Kathryn Newton continues to demonstrate her versatility and screen presence in the lead role. Following her work in horror comedy with Freaky, and big-budget franchise fare with Ant-Man, Newton handles the demands of the survival thriller with professionalism. Sarah could easily be a passive victim, defined entirely by what happens to her, but Newton's performance suggests interior life and resilience. Her reactions feel specific rather than generic, whether dealing with social slights or life-threatening danger. The physical demands of the role are considerable: extended underwater sequences, scenes of physical distress, and the challenge of maintaining performance continuity in what were likely fragmented shooting conditions. Newton handles these technical requirements while maintaining character consistency, no small feat in a production of this nature. Lana Condor's work as Max represents a calculated risk for the actress. Trading on her likability from the To All the Boys franchise, Condor plays against type as the group's toxic center. Her Max is recognizable as a type, the friend who positions themselves as the fun one, who equates adventure with worth, who needs to be the protagonist of every situation. Condor finds moments of vulnerability within this characterization, suggesting the insecurity that often drives such behavior, though the screenplay doesn't give her sufficient room to fully develop these dimensions. The dynamic between Newton and Condor carries much of the film's emotional weight. Their scenes together crackle with unspoken history and suppressed resentment. We can sense the friendship these characters once had, making its current dysfunction feel like a genuine loss rather than simple antagonism. Both actresses deserve credit for creating this sense of relationship history without the benefit of flashbacks or extensive exposition. Beneath its genre surface, The Devil's Mouth engages with several themes that give it additional dimension. The most prominent is the question of entitlement and consequence, embodied primarily through Max's character. Her insistence on overriding expert advice, her prioritization of experience over safety, her assumption that money and privilege should grant access to any desired adventure. These attitudes drive the plot's catastrophe and reflect broader patterns of behavior in international tourism. The film doesn't preach or belabor this theme, but it's present in the text for viewers inclined to notice it. The contrast between Watt's respectful approach to the caves as places with inherent risks and sacred significance versus the tourists' view of them as entertainment venues creates a clear value judgment. When disaster strikes, it's directly attributable to the choice to ignore indigenous expertise in favor of thrill-seeking. The film also explores, albeit briefly, the idea of wilderness as fundamentally indifferent to human concerns. The shark isn't evil or vengeful, it's simply an animal operating according to its nature in its environment. The humans are intruders in a space where the normal rules don't apply, where wealth and social status provide no protection, where nature reasserts dominance over human presumption. Sarah's arc touches on themes of self-worth and the courage to reject toxic relationships. Her position as the fifth wheel at the story's start represents a broader diminishment, a pattern of allowing herself to be marginalized by people who don't value her. The survival scenario becomes a crucible that burns away these patterns, forcing Sarah to advocate for herself and recognize that loyalty to people who treat her as disposable is misplaced loyalty. Comparing The Devil's Mouth to the pantheon of shark cinema illuminates both its achievements and limitations. It obviously cannot match the cultural impact or cinematic mastery of Jaws, which remains the gold standard against which all subsequent shark films are measured. Spielberg's masterpiece succeeded through perfect alchemy of script, performances, direction, score, and yes, the technical challenges that forced creative decisions which strengthened the final product. More relevant comparisons might be to films like The Shallows, 2016, which similarly featured a single predator and a confined setting, or 47 Meters Down, 2017, and its sequel, which explored sharks and caves in combination. The Shallows succeeded largely through Blake Lively's committed central performance and tight direction that maintained tension across a lean runtime. The Devil's Mouth offers better character work than The Shallows, but less effective use of its predator. The 47 Meters Down films provide perhaps the closest comparison, as both feature cave systems and sharks. Those films leaned harder into the claustrophobic dread of deep water diving and confined spaces, creating anxiety through multiple vectors: the sharks, but also oxygen depletion, nitrogen narcosis, and the physical challenge of navigating underwater passages. The Devil's Mouth might have benefited from incorporating more of these additional danger elements to compound the threat. Against recent straight-to-streaming shark content, The Devil's Mouth lands in the middle tier. It's more competently made than obviously cheap cash grabs, with decent production values and recognizable actors. However, it lacks the self-aware humor of films that embrace their B-movie status or the elevated execution that might justify serious critical consideration. Jeff Wadlow has carved out a niche as a director of elevated genre films, projects with recognizable casts and reasonable budgets that aim slightly higher than direct-to-video fare without reaching for prestige. His filmography includes Kick-Ass 2, Truth or Dare, Fantasy Island, and now, The Devil's Mouth, a consistent record of working in genre spaces with commercial rather than artistic ambitions. Wadlow's direction demonstrates competence across the technical requirements of the shark thriller. He stages action clearly, maintaining spatial geography so viewers understand where characters are in relation to each other and to the threat. His pacing keeps the story moving without feeling rushed. He elicits committed performances from his cast despite the screenplay's limitations. However, Wadlow rarely transcends the material or elevates it through distinctive directorial vision. His films feel professionally assembled rather than artistically driven. There's little in The Devil's Mouth that bears a unique directorial signature, no moments that could only have been created by this specific filmmaker. This workmanlike approach serves the film adequately but prevents it from achieving memorability. The Devil's Mouth represents the current state of mid-tier streaming genre content, professionally made, adequately executed, and ultimately forgettable. It brings enough craft and novelty to satisfy undemanding viewers looking for background entertainment, but lacks the inspiration or execution to stand out in an increasingly crowded field. The cave setting provides genuine atmospheric value, creating spaces that feel authentically threatening and visually distinctive. The character dynamics, particularly the Sarah-Max relationship, give the film emotional stakes beyond simple survival. The performances exceed what the material requires, with Newton and Condor bringing commitment and nuance to underwritten roles. These strengths, however, cannot overcome fundamental weaknesses in the film's core appeal as a shark thriller. The predator lacks presence and menace, appearing frequently but without impact. The attack sequences become repetitive rather than escalating in tension. The violence is restrained to the point of bloodlessness, undermining the visceral thrills the genre promises. For viewers approaching The Devil's Mouth with appropriately modest expectations, a time filler that provides mild tension and decent production values, it delivers adequately. For those hoping for a genuinely thrilling or memorable entry in the shark movie canon, it disappoints. The film exists in that frustrating middle ground of being too competent to dismiss entirely but too flawed to recommend enthusiastically. The Devil's Mouth is exactly what it appears to be, a streaming-era genre exercise that meets basic requirements without exceeding them. It will occupy a slot in Prime Video's content library, generate modest viewership numbers, and fade from memory shortly after viewing. For a genre that has produced films as culturally significant as Jaws, and as gleefully entertaining as Deep Blue Sea, this represents a missed opportunity to deliver something more substantial than mere content. The shark movie renaissance of the 2020s has produced quantity over quality, with The Devil's Mouth embodying this trend. Until filmmakers rediscover what made the best shark films effective, genuine suspense, memorable predators, smart scripts, and directorial vision that transcends formula, audiences can expect more of the same. Competent, forgettable entries that occupy screen time without occupying memory. The Devil's Mouth swims in these shallow waters, neither sinking completely nor reaching deeper depths where true excellence might be found.
This is the Bad Omens Bad Decisions vacation for this gaggle of college kids. From the opening frames of The Devil's Mouth, it becomes abundantly clear that we're embarking on a journey with characters who possess the collective survival instinct of lemmings enthusiastically racing toward a cliff. Director Jeff Wadlow's latest foray into genre filmmaking presents us with a scenario so steeped in foreseeable catastrophe that watching it unfold becomes an exercise in frustration rather than suspense. This isn't the delicious anticipation of horror fans waiting for the inevitable, this is the teeth-grinding irritation of watching preventable disaster approach in slow motion while the people in danger actively accelerate toward it. They're idiot Americans in Thailand incapable of deciphering myriad abandon all hope red flags regularly thrown in their path. The film doesn't just hint at danger, it practically erects neon billboards screaming, "Turn back now," at every opportunity. Yet our protagonists barrel forward with the determination of people who have apparently never encountered the concept of cause and effect. The aggressive hissing monkey that attacks during their initial jungle excursion. Ignored. The massive school of stinging jellyfish that leaves Sarah screaming in agony while her so-called friends literally sail away without her. A minor inconvenience quickly forgotten. The chomped-in-half sea turtle bearing the unmistakable semicircular bite radius of a large predatory shark. Merely an unfortunate discovery that warrants approximately 30 seconds of concern before being dismissed entirely. Then we have the skeleton cave, literally named for the human and animal remains discovered within its chambers, and the cavern full of dead fish floating in murky water, their bodies creating a carpet of decay that should trigger every evolutionary alarm bell hardwired into human consciousness. All signs telling them to get out, but these people have apparently never seen a movie before. The irony, of course, is that The Devil's Mouth exists within that peculiar narrative space where characters seem to lack any cultural awareness of the genre they're inhabiting, despite clear evidence to the contrary. And I'd surmise that movies don't exist in their reality if they hadn't made some Finding Nemo references about just keeping swimming. This self-aware moment of pop culture reference demolishes any suspension of disbelief regarding the characters' ignorance. They do know about stories involving aquatic peril. They do understand narrative frameworks where persistence in dangerous situations leads to catastrophe. They simply choose to ignore these lessons in favor of, what, exactly? Instagram-worthy adventure content. Bragging rights about being spontaneous. Which leads one to conclude that they're just stupid. There's a crucial distinction in horror and thriller cinema between characters who make understandable mistakes under pressure and characters whose every decision seems calculated to maximize their own jeopardy. The Devil's Mouth firmly places its protagonists in the latter category, asking audiences to invest in the survival of people who actively work against their own interests at every turn. Meet your shark bait, character introduction and group dynamics. The Dope Squad is led by forever besties duo Max, Lana Condor, and Sarah, Kathryn Newton, childhood friends whose relationship has curdled into something toxic but familiar, the kind of friendship that persists primarily through inertia and shared history rather than genuine mutual affection or respect. Rounding out the group are Max's boyfriend James, Nico Hiraga, whose primary character trait appears to be present, and PDA all-the-way couple. Adrian, Tommy Rose, and Greg Gavin Casalegno, who exist mainly to make the single Sarah feel even more isolated and to provide additional bodies for the eventual feeding frenzy. The trip is their last hurrah before they go home to be adults, that time-honored tradition of the post-graduation adventure that cinema has explored in everything from The Beach to Hostel. The premise of young people seeking one final moment of freedom before the responsibilities of adulthood descend carries inherent dramatic potential. The tension between holding on to youth and accepting maturity, the desperation to make memories that will sustain through decades of ordinary life, the fear that the best days are already behind them. The Devil's Mouth gestures toward these themes without genuinely engaging with them. Max and Sarah's plans of staying together for all eternity are thwarted by what's essentially a staring contest. One has accepted a job in LA and the other in NYC. This bicoastal separation serves as the film's primary character conflict, the wedge driving between friends who promise to navigate adulthood together. It's a relatable situation. How many friendships have founded on the practical realities of geographic distance, but the screenplay treats it with all the depth of a greeting card. Max is the alpha of the group, capable of talking people into doing whatever she wants. Lana Condor plays this quality with obvious relish, clearly enjoying the opportunity to embody someone manipulative and self-centered after building her career on likable ingenue roles. Her Max is a particular type we all recognize, the charismatic narcissist who frames every situation around their own desires while maintaining plausible deniability about their selfishness. She positions her demands as group consensus, her recklessness as spontaneity, her disregard for others' comfort as inspiring everyone to live more fully. Which is the type of trait that makes you root for the pointy fish and its nasty predatory instincts. Herein lies one of The Devil's Mouth's fundamental miscalculations. Horror and thriller films can certainly feature unlikable protagonists. Some of the genre's finest entries center on deeply flawed or even reprehensible characters. However, there's a delicate balance required. Audiences need some reason to invest in these characters' survival beyond pure narrative obligation. We need moments of vulnerability, glimpses of humanity beneath the flaws, or at minimum, entertaining enough personalities that watching them is pleasurable regardless of whether we're rooting for or against them. Max crosses the line from flawed but human into genuinely insufferable, and the film seems aware of this, positioning her as a quasi-antagonist in the early going. The problem is that the other characters aren't compelling enough to carry our sympathies by default. Sarah comes closest, positioned as the put-upon friend finally reaching her breaking point, but even she makes decisions so bafflingly counterproductive that sympathy curdles into exasperation. The guide ignored, when local expertise meets tourist entitlement. Case in point, how she persuades their kayaking, swimming tour guide Tame Thapthimthong into not only taking the more adventurous route through the cave system known as the Devil's Mouth, but also insisting on continuing with the venture despite various bad omens, warning signs and the advice of someone who, actually knows what is talking about. Thapthimthong's tour guide character, identified in the film as Wat, represents one of the screenplay's more interesting elements, albeit one that remains frustratingly underdeveloped. As a local expert with intimate knowledge of these cave systems, he understands both their beauty and their danger. He's clearly conducted these tours countless times, developing protocols and routes designed to provide tourists with memorable experiences while minimizing risk. His entire professional existence depends on keeping clients safe and happy, creating a natural tension between these sometimes competing priorities. When Max begins her campaign to explore the more dangerous passages, identified on the map quite literally in red, as opposed to the recommended green route, Wat resists. His objections are professional, measured, and entirely reasonable. These caves are dangerous. People have died in them. The tides and currents are unpredictable. Marine life, including predatory species, sometimes enters the system. Everything about his body language and tone communicates someone who has seen what can happen when tourists overestimate their capabilities and underestimate the environment. Max deploys her full arsenal of manipulation, appealing to his sense of adventure, suggesting that he's being overcautious, implying that other guides would be more accommodating, and ultimately wielding the weapon of the American tourist dollar, that unspoken threat that resistance might impact his tip or future business. It's an uncomfortable dynamic that the film acknowledges but doesn't fully explore, the power imbalance between wealthy tourists and local service workers, the pressure to provide authentic and extreme experiences, the way people on vacation often abandon reasonable caution in pursuit of stories they can share back home. So onward they go into obvious peril, in a competition to see which of them is the most annoying as they're stalked by a bull shark who's obviously a big fan of Alien and Creature from the Black Lagoon. The introduction of the shark, our ostensible main antagonist, comes surprisingly late in the film's runtime, with a full third of the running time devoted to establishing character dynamics and setting before the first fin breaks the surface. This isn't inherently problematic. Jaws, after all, doesn't reveal its shark until well into the film, using the delay to build community, establish stakes, and create the economic and political pressures that complicate the response to the threat. The Devil's Mouth attempts a similar approach but lacks the screenplay sophistication to make this extended setup compelling. Instead of deepening our understanding of these characters or building genuine tension, the pre-shark sequences simply mark time, repeating the same basic beats. Max suggests something reckless, others object mildly, Max persists, everyone capitulates, minor consequences ensue but are ignored, repeat. Who among these 5 twits will survive? No spoilers, amigos. The film clearly wants us to engage in the time-honored horror movie tradition of prediction and investment, trying to determine who lives and who becomes chum based on character traits, narrative positioning, and the subtle or not so subtle moral calculus most genre films employ. The final girl concept has evolved over decades of horror cinema into a sophisticated set of conventions that savvy audiences can read like semaphores. The Devil's Mouth understands these conventions intellectually but fumbles their execution. The survivors are telegraphed so obviously from the early going that there's no pleasure in the speculation. The deaths, when they come, land with thuds rather than shocks, inevitable rather than surprising, perfunctory rather than cathartic. Comparative cinema, where does this fit in the creature feature landscape? The Devil's Mouth is essentially The Descent crossed with, well, Jaws is the inevitable comparison. Every shark film exists in the shadow of Steven Spielberg's 1975 masterpiece, that rare creature feature that transcended genre to become genuine cinema, combining technical mastery, superb performances, sophisticated themes, and perfect pacing into something that works both as visceral thriller and as meditation on masculinity, class, civic responsibility, and humanity's relationship with nature. Comparing anything to Jaws is somewhat unfair. It's like comparing every boxing movie to Raging Bull or every crime film to The Godfather. The masterpiece becomes a cudgel used to bludgeon perfectly adequate films that never aspired to such heights. That said, The Devil's Mouth invites the comparison by working so clearly within the framework Spielberg established. The shark as nature's instrument of judgment, the escalating body count, the diverse group forced to cooperate for survival, the climactic confrontation in the predator's domain. But this movie has less in common with a classic, or even a solid thriller like The Shallows, and far more in common with the middlingly forgettable shenanigans of Under Paris or Thrash. The Shallows, Blake Lively's 2016 survival thriller, demonstrated that the shark movie formula could still generate genuine tension and entertainment when executed with focus and craft. That film's simple premise, surfer stranded on a rock within striking distance of a great white, created a contained pressure cooker that director John Collett-Serra exploited masterfully. Lively's committed physical performance, combined with tight pacing and genuinely suspenseful set pieces, elevated what could have been disposable VOD fodder into a genuinely effective thriller. The Devil's Mouth possesses neither the focused simplicity of The Shallows nor the self-aware camp appeal of films that embrace their B-movie status. It occupies that unfortunate middle ground, too self-serious to be fun, too formulaic to be genuinely thrilling, too competent to dismiss entirely but too flawed to recommend. The recent glut of shark content on streaming platforms has created a spectrum from the intentionally ridiculous Sharknado, and its ilk to the genuinely ambitious Under Paris, at least attempted to do something conceptually interesting with its Parisian setting, to the utterly forgettable time fillers that exist simply because content libraries need feeding. The Devil's Mouth falls firmly in this final category, professionally made filler, competently executed but entirely devoid of the inspiration or craft that might elevate it above the baseline. Performance worth watching, finding quality in the depths. Well, the cavern full of dead fish is an unfortunate and accidental metaphor for the agency of these characters. This is perhaps the review's most cutting observation. The image of deceased fish floating lifelessly, moved only by current and tide, perfectly encapsulates the protagonist's relationship to the narrative. They don't drive the story through meaningful choices. They simply react, flopping from one crisis to the next, propelled by the screenplay's requirements rather than any genuine character motivation or development. Agency, the capacity of characters to make meaningful choices that impact outcomes, separates compelling protagonists from mere plot devices. The best survival thrillers give their characters impossible choices with no clear right answers, forcing them to reveal their true natures through decisions made under extreme pressure. The Devil's Mouth offers its characters plenty of choices, but most are so obviously the wrong decision that making them anyway simply reinforces their lack of agency. They're not choosing between bad options, they're choosing the bad option when better alternatives are clearly available, but Newton does a reasonably commendable job of exonerating herself from some flaccid material. Kathryn Newton has emerged as one of her generation's most reliably engaging young actors, bringing intelligence and presence to everything from horror comedy Freaky, to franchise tentpoles Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, to prestige limited series The Society. Her natural charisma and the suggestion of intelligence behind her eyes make her believable as both the vulnerable target and the resourceful survivor. In The Devil's Mouth, Newton works overtime to inject Sarah with more dimension than the screenplay provides. She finds moments of quiet reaction, a glance when Max takes credit for something, a barely perceptible wince when treated as an afterthought, that communicate volumes about this character's internal life and the slow accumulation of resentments that have poisoned this friendship. When the survival scenario forces Sarah to finally push back against Max's dominance, Newton sells both the fear and the liberation at that moment. It's a testament to Newton's skill that Sarah remains sympathetic to
Lana Condor, freed from the wholesome constraints of her "to all the boys" persona, clearly relishes playing someone selfish and manipulative. There's a fearlessness to her performance. She doesn't try to soften Max's edges or make her more palatable. Max is consistently self-centered, dismissive of others' concerns, and reckless with other people's safety, and Condor commits to these qualities fully. In a better film with a more sophisticated screenplay, this would create a genuinely complex antagonist. In The Devil's Mouth, it mainly makes us impatient for her inevitable comeuppance. The supporting cast, Hiraga, Rose, and Casalegno, do what they can with severely underwritten roles. Hiraga brings a natural likability that makes James more sympathetic than his limited character development warrants. Rose and Casalegno have even less to work with, functioning primarily as additional bodies to raise the stakes and populate the cave system. Next time, try the Chipmunk's Tuft, a lesson in ignoring warning signs. Next time, try vacationing at the Chipmunk's Tuft instead of the Devil's Mouth. There were so many signs. So many clues. So many opportunities to use common sense. The film's repeated emphasis on ignored warnings creates a peculiar viewing experience. Horror audiences generally accept a certain level of poor decision-making from characters, the genre conventions demand it, and part of the pleasure comes from that Cassandra-like experience of seeing danger the characters don't recognize. However, there's a threshold beyond which poor decisions become insulting to the audience. When characters ignore one or two warning signs, we can chalk it up to human nature, the optimism bias that makes people believe bad things happen to others but not to themselves, the tendency to rationalize away concerning information, the social pressure to go along with group decisions even when individual alarm bells are ringing. When characters ignore dozens of increasingly obvious warnings, when the universe practically intervenes to say, do not proceed, when even other characters within the narrative point out how stupid the plan is, continued forward momentum stops feeling like character choice and starts feeling like screenplay requirement. The characters aren't making decisions, they're following a script, and the seams of the narrative construction become painfully visible. But movies like this have no use for common sense and more use for nonsense, because nonsense provides more opportunities for untimely death at the hands, fins of a wildly toothy predator. This is the fundamental bargain of creature features and survival horror. We accept a certain amount of contrivance in exchange for visceral thrills and creative kills. The best examples of the genre honor this bargain by making the contrivances feel organic, by creating situations where the choices that lead to danger emerge naturally from character and circumstance. The Devil's Mouth breaks this implicit contract by making its contrivances so obvious and its characters' choices so unmotivated by anything except plot requirements that the entire structure collapses. We can't lose ourselves in the survival scenario because we're constantly aware of the machinery generating that scenario. That didn't attend university but nevertheless shows more significant signs of intelligence than what it's hunting, e.g., intuiting our desire for these squabbling nincompoop smooth-brained humans to shut up, perhaps forever. The shark, which should be a terrifying force of nature, an embodiment of predatory efficiency honed over millions of years of evolution, becomes the audience surrogate, the entity we identify with rather than fear. When the shark appears, we feel relief that something is finally happening and perhaps a touch of schadenfreude that these obnoxious characters might finally face consequences for their stupidity. This is not, generally speaking, the desired emotional response to your horror movie's antagonist. We should fear for the characters, not actively root for their demise. Some films can play with this dynamic intentionally. Certain slasher films position their killers as folk heroes dispatching unlikable teens, creating a knowing complicity between filmmaker and audience. The Devil's Mouth doesn't seem aware that it's generated this dynamic, playing its survival scenario straight while inadvertently making the predator more sympathetic than the prey. The double-meaning title and diminishing returns. And so The Devil's Mouth, please note the clever double meaning in the title ! Proceeds, never deviating from expectations, occasionally drawing out tension for payoffs that are never particularly surprising, thrilling, or dramatically invigorating. The title indeed carries dual significance. It refers both to the cave system where the action occurs and to the shark's jaws, that more death that dispatches characters with mechanical regularity. This kind of layered title should feel clever, a sign that the filmmakers are operating with some level of sophistication and intentionality. Instead, the obviousness of the double meaning, telegraphed constantly throughout the film, feels more like the screenplay underlining its own jokes, afraid audiences won't get the reference without explicit explanation. The film's structure follows the established template with religious devotion, setup, escalation, crisis, climax, resolution. Within this framework, individual sequences repeat the same beats, characters discuss their situation, someone suggests a plan, objections are raised and overcome, they proceed with the plan, complications arise, the shark attacks or almost attacks, they escape to temporary safety, repeat. This rhythm becomes numbing, the predictability draining tension from moments that should generate suspense. This is a classic case of checklist as screenplay, even beyond the old, pick, 'em off one by one bromides. The screenplay by Arja Gabel and young Joe Wessner, which earned Blacklist recognition in an earlier form, reads like it was constructed from a template of shark movie requirements rather than emerging from a genuine creative vision. Every element feels calculated to meet genre expectations without considering whether those expectations serve this particular story. Exotic setting, check. The Thailand location provides visual appeal and the frisson of Westerners in peril abroad, tapping into travel anxiety and the vulnerability of being far from home in unfamiliar environments. The production makes adequate use of the location without truly exploiting its potential. We get establishing shots of beautiful coastlines and glimpses of local culture, but the film could largely have been shot anywhere with cave systems and ocean access. Rudimentary character development, check. The screenplay provides the bare minimum of characterization, just enough to distinguish between characters and establish who we should root for, without the depth that would make them genuinely compelling. We learn that Sarah and Max have been friends since childhood, that Sarah feels left behind, that Max is self-centered, that the others are in relationships. These are character sketches, not character portraits. Sharks don't act that way. Behavior, check. Creature features always take liberties with actual animal behavior, and audiences generally accept this as genre convention. Sharks in movies are essentially movie monsters that happen to be based on real animals. However, even within this accepting framework, the devil's mouth strains credibility with its shark's behavior. Bull sharks are indeed capable of tolerating fresh water and navigating into unexpected areas. They've been found in rivers hundreds of miles from the ocean. However, a bull shark taking up residence in a cave system and actively hunting humans who enter its territory behaves more like a slasher movie villain than an actual predator. Real sharks are opportunistic feeders that avoid unnecessary risk and typically don't view humans as preferred prey. The shark in The Devil's Mouth pursues the characters with Jason Voorhees-like determination, seemingly motivated more by narrative requirement than animal instinct. Karma in the form of a very hungry, angry, scary thing from the natural world exacting vengeance on stupid, obnoxious Americans in a foreign country. Check. There's a long tradition in horror of nature taking revenge on human arrogance and environmental destruction. Films like The Birds and Long Weekend position natural forces as actively hostile responses to human behavior. The Tourists in Peril Abroad subgenre often carries implicit or explicit critique of Western entitlement and the treatment of foreign countries as playgrounds. The Devil's Mouth gestures toward these themes without committing to them. The characters are indeed obnoxious Americans who ignore local expertise and treat the environment with disrespect, but the film doesn't develop this into genuine commentary. The shark isn't positioned as nature's instrument of judgment, it's just a shark that happens to be where the characters go. The thematic potential remains unrealized, another check on the genre requirement list without the depth that might distinguish this film from countless others. Technical execution. You've got your Jaws Y score tracking behind lots of BS jump scares, inopportune fainting, and just a dream fake-outs dragging the movie into mediocrity. The film's technical execution ranges from competent to actively counterproductive, with several elements undermining rather than enhancing the intended tension. The score, composed by composer named, clearly takes inspiration from John Williams' iconic Jaws theme, that simple, escalating two-note pattern that has become synonymous with approaching danger. This is dangerous territory for any shark film composer. The Jaws theme is so culturally embedded that any musical cue that resembles it inevitably invites comparison, and that comparison is rarely flattering. The Devil's Mouth's score attempts to create similar mounting dread through repetitive musical patterns, but lacks the sophistication and restraint that made Williams's work so effective. Instead of building genuine tension, the music often telegraphs scares, announcing the shark's presence before visual confirmation and thereby undercutting the potential for surprise. The score also commits the cardinal sin of overuse, deploying the danger theme so frequently that it loses impact, becoming sonic wallpaper rather than punctuation. The jump scares, those sudden loud noises and quick cuts designed to provoke involuntary startle responses, are employed with abandon and diminishing returns. Jump scares aren't inherently bad filmmaking, they're a tool that, used judiciously, can provide effective jolts of adrenaline. The problem comes when they're used as a substitute for genuine suspense rather than a complement to it. The Devil's Mouth leans heavily on false jump scares, characters startled by their friends, fish swimming past in murky water, sudden movements that turn out to be nothing. These fake-outs are meant to keep audiences on edge, creating a boy who cried wolf effect so that when the real danger arrives, viewers are uncertain whether this time the threat is genuine. However, when deployed too frequently, they simply become irritating, training audiences to distrust the film's vocabulary and disengage from the suspense. The inopportune fainting refers to a hoary genre convention where characters lose consciousness at dramatically convenient moments, often preventing them from escaping danger or forcing others to risk themselves in rescue. This device can work when organically motivated, injuries, blood loss, oxygen deprivation, and other realistic causes of unconsciousness. In The Devil's Mouth, characters seem to pass out primarily because the screenplay needs to complicate escapes or create rescue scenarios, straining credulity and testing patience. The just a dream fake-outs represent perhaps the most frustrating choice. These sequences present what appears to be dramatic action, a character killed, a shark attack, a catastrophic collapse, before revealing that the preceding scene was merely a nightmare or hallucination. This technique has been thoroughly discredited by decades of overuse, training audiences to distrust any particularly dramatic sequence and wonder whether it's really happening within the narrative reality. When a film deploys dream fake-outs, it fundamentally damages the contract between storyteller and audience. We invest emotionally in events we believe are actually occurring within the story world. When the film reveals that these events didn't really happen, it renders that emotional investment meaningless and makes us question whether to trust any subsequent events. The technique can work when used extremely sparingly and with clear purpose, but The Devil's Mouth uses it as a crutch, generating false drama when the actual narrative fails to provide adequate tension. The shark, a character that should terrify but merely appears. At least we have a halfway decent CGI shark to root for, but it's not enough. The shark represents both a technical achievement and a creative failure. From a purely visual effects standpoint, the creature is reasonably well rendered. The modeling, texturing, and animation show competent work from the VFX team. The shark moves through water with generally plausible physics, its form and proportions align with actual bull sharks, and the integration with live-action footage is serviceable if not seamless. However, technical competence in rendering is only part of what makes a movie monster effective. The shark needs presence, that ineffable quality that makes it feel dangerous even when not actively attacking, that creates dread in its absence and delivers on that dread in its appearances. The best movie sharks, from Jaws' Bruce to The Shallows' unnamed Great White, achieve this through a combination of factors: point-of-view shots that put us in the predator's perspective, reaction shots of characters registering its presence, strategic concealment that makes the shark larger in our imagination than on screen, and distinctive characteristics that give the creature personality. The Devil's Mouth's shark lacks most of these elements. We rarely get POV shots from the shark's perspective, losing the opportunity to see the characters as prey, vulnerable and unaware. The shark is shown frequently and fully, demystified early and often, never allowed to grow larger in imagination than in reality. Most critically, the shark lacks any distinctive characteristics, scars, unusual coloring, behavioral quirks, that would make it memorable as a character rather than just an obstacle. The film also undermines its shark through inconsistent rules about its capabilities and behavior. Sometimes the shark can navigate incredibly narrow passages, other times it's blocked by openings that should be passable. Sometimes it's aware of characters from great distances, other times it somehow doesn't detect people nearby. This inconsistency exists because the screenplay needs the shark to be more or less capable depending on plot requirements rather than establishing consistent parameters and building tension within those constraints. This movie is dead in the water. This final judgment, harsh but fair, summarizes the fundamental problem with The Devil's Mouth. It's not aggressively terrible, there are no laughably bad performances, no incomprehensibly inept direction, no jaw-droppingly poor effects work that crosses into so bad it's good territory. It's simply inert, a professionally made product that fulfills basic genre requirements without ever threatening to exceed them. The film exists in that unfortunate space where it's too competent to mock but too flawed to praise, too self-serious to be campy.
For viewers seeking shark movie thrills, dozens of better options exist. Want masterful suspense? Revisit Jaws. Want lean, efficient tension? Try The Shallows. Want fun B-movie absurdity? The Sharknado series awaits. Want thought-provoking creature features? The Descent, technically not sharks but similar cave-based survival horror, or Crawl, Deliver. Even recent shark content like The Meg provides more entertainment through shameless big-budget spectacle, while smaller films like 47 Meters Down generate superior tension through tighter focus. The Devil's Mouth offers nothing these alternatives don't provide more effectively. Its cave setting, while conceptually interesting, is underutilized, failing to generate the claustrophobic dread that should be its primary asset. Its character work, while slightly above baseline for the genre, isn't strong enough to carry the film when the shark sequences disappoint. Its technical execution is adequate without being impressive, competent without being inspired. The film's failures aren't individual catastrophes but cumulative mediocrity, 1,000 small choices that take the safe, expected, formulaic path rather than risking anything distinctive or memorable. The screenplay checks genre boxes without bringing fresh perspective. The direction ensures basic comprehension without creating memorable images. The performances deliver professionalism without transcendent moments. The shark appears without terrifying. For a genre that has given us one of cinema's most perfect thrillers in Jaws, numerous effective B-movie entertainments, and endless variations on the formula ranging from sublime to ridiculous, The Devil's Mouth represents a disappointing entry. It had potential, a strong cast, an interesting setting, decent resources, but squandered these advantages through adherence to formula and unwillingness to take risks. The streaming era has created an environment where films like this can exist profitably despite artistic mediocrity. They need only capture a few hours of subscriber attention to justify their existence in a content library. They don't need to be memorable, rewatchable, or particularly good. They simply need to be adequate placeholders that prevent subscribers from canceling while they wait for higher profile releases. The Devil's Mouth fulfills this function adequately. It will keep shark movie enthusiasts occupied for 90 minutes. It will provide background noise for viewers scrolling through their phones. It will appear in, because you watched, recommendation queues and generate a few clicks. But it won't be remembered, discussed, or recommended. It won't inspire the passionate defense of cult appreciation or the entertaining vitriol of hate watching. It will simply exist, briefly, before sinking beneath the waves of content that wash over audiences daily. In the final analysis, Perhaps the most damning criticism is that The Devil's Mouth wastes its potential. With smarter character work, more effective use of its setting, better deployment of its shark, and willingness to subvert rather than simply fulfill genre expectations, this could have been something worthwhile. Instead, it's just another shark movie in an ocean already crowded with them, distinguished only by being slightly less interesting than most. If you like the echo of screaming, Amazon Prime Video has a movie for you. And I mean that literally, folks. This film is absolutely packed with screaming. Screaming in caves, screaming underwater, screaming at sharks, screaming at each other. If there was an Oscar category for most screaming per minute of runtime, The Devil's Mouth would be a serious contender. But here's the thing, screaming doesn't equal suspense, and volume doesn't equal terror. This is one of the fundamental misunderstandings that plagues this entire production. Everyone else should probably avoid Jeff Wadlow's miserable The Devil's Mouth, and I don't say that lightly. I'm someone who genuinely enjoys creature features. I'll defend good shark movies all day long. I've sat through dozens of terrible ones because sometimes even bad shark movies can be fun. But this is something different, and not in a good way. A movie with a strong young ensemble of rising stars that Amazon MGM Studios is burying on their streaming service instead of giving it the theatrical release that its ensemble likely expected. And that's really telling, isn't it? When a studio has recognizable young talent like Kathryn Newton and Lana Condor, actors with genuine box office appeal and proven track records, and they decide to dump the film on streaming with minimal promotion, that tells you everything you need to know about their confidence in the product. This wasn't a strategic streaming first decision like some prestige films that premiere on platforms. This was a burial, plain and simple. The sad thing is that this shark movie isn't even bad enough to recommend in a "you gotta see this garbage" manner like last year's viral Prime original, War of the Worlds. Now that's an important distinction for those of you who enjoy hate watching or watching terrible movies with friends for entertainment. Some movies are so spectacularly bad that they become entertaining in their awfulness. They're memorable train wrecks that you want to share with people. The Devil's Mouth doesn't even achieve that dubious distinction. It's just aggressively forgettable instead of memorably awful, which is almost worse. And I really mean aggressively forgettable. This is the kind of movie where you'll struggle to remember what happened in it literally hours after watching it. The plot beats blur together, the character moments fail to land, the scares don't scare, and the whole experience just sort of washes over you without leaving any impression whatsoever. In the age of endless streaming content, being forgettable might actually be the worst sin a movie can commit. Jeff Wadlow, a director with a very specific track record, the director of such atrocities as Truth or Dare and Fantasy Island, packed up his bags and took a cast of beautiful young people to Thailand to make another movie that reminds us we're much safer on our couches. Let's talk about Jeff Wadlow for a minute, because his filmography is actually pretty instructive for understanding what went wrong here. Wadlow first gained attention with Cry Wolf back in 2005, a teen thriller that had some interesting ideas even if the execution was middling. Then came Never Back Down in 2008, a formulaic but competent fighting movie. These early films showed a director who could handle action and work with young casts, but who struggled with originality and depth. Then we got Kick-Ass 2 Inches in 2013, which had the unenviable task of following up Matthew Vaughn's surprise hit Original. The sequel was significantly weaker, lacking the original's subversive edge and tonal balance. But it's his more recent output that really establishes the pattern. Truth or Dare, from 2018, was a horror film with an interesting premise. A supernatural game of truth or dare with deadly consequences, that was executed with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The CGI faces when characters were possessed by the game became instant meme material, and not in a good way. The film made money because it was cheap to produce and released theatrically, but it was critically savaged. Then came 2020's Fantasy Island, a horror reimagining of the classic TV series that somehow made a tropical paradise boring and a magical premise tedious. Watching these films, you start to see Wadlow's limitations as a filmmaker. He can organize a production. His films look professionally shot and edited, but he seems to lack any distinctive vision or the ability to elevate mediocre material. He's a competent technician without being an artist, and that's exactly what The Devil's Mouth demonstrates once again. It's one of those films that was likely much more fun to make than it is to watch. And you can absolutely see that on screen. When you're shooting in Thailand with a young, attractive cast, staying in nice hotels, exploring beautiful locations, and playing around in the water all day. I'm sure it's a great time. For the audience watching the final product, not so much. This disconnect between the experience of making a movie and the experience of watching it is something you see frequently with these kind of location-based productions. The opening, Paradise Lost and Friendships Fractured, as evidenced by the credit sequence of its gorgeous cast partying on a boat in what looks like one of the most beautiful places in the world. The film opens with exactly what you'd expect: beautiful young people in a beautiful place, drinking, laughing, and having the time of their lives. The cinematography in these early scenes actually showcases Thailand's stunning coastline effectively. The water is that impossible turquoise blue, the limestone cliffs jut dramatically from the sea, and the whole setting looks absolutely idyllic. This is standard operating procedure for these kinds of survival thrillers: show the paradise before introducing the horror, establish the stakes of what's about to be lost, make the audience understand what's at risk. The problem is that The Devil's Mouth lingers in this space too long without using the time effectively. We get extended sequences of the group partying, swimming, and being generally carefree, but we don't learn much about them as people. It's all surface-level establishment. These people are friends, they're on vacation, they're having fun. Okay, great, but who are they really? From the beginning, Asia Gabel and Myung-Jo Westner are playing favorites, focusing on two close friends in Sarah, played by Kathryn Newton, and Max, played by Lana Condor. The screenplay, written by this duo, clearly positions these two as the central relationship of the film. Everything else, the other characters, the shark, even the survival scenario itself, exists primarily to test and transform this friendship. In theory, this could work. The Descent is essentially about female friendship dynamics tested by extreme circumstances, and it's one of the best horror films of the 2000s. But that film had a sophisticated understanding of its characters and their relationships. The Devil's Mouth has stereotypes and obvious conflict. When Sarah is accidentally left far enough from the boat that her screams can't be heard when she's attacked by jellyfish, it creates a rift between her and her BFF. This sequence, which occurs early in the film, is actually one of the more effective moments. The jellyfish attack is genuinely uncomfortable to watch. The translucent bodies drifting through the water, Sarah's panic as she realizes she's surrounded, her desperate attempts to swim away while being repeatedly stung, and the horror of her friends being too far away to help. What makes this scene work, at least partially, is that it taps into real fears. Jellyfish are genuinely dangerous, jellyfish stings are genuinely painful, and the idea of being helpless in the water while a threat surrounds you is viscerally frightening. The scene also doesn't rely on CGI. Those are real jellyfish, or very convincing practical effects, which gives the sequence a tangibility that the later shark scenes completely lack. But more importantly, this scene establishes the dynamic between Sarah and Max that will drive the rest of the film. Max's thoughtlessness. She was so caught up in whatever she was doing that she didn't notice Sarah wasn't on the boat, and her inadequate response to hurting her friend creates legitimate tension. Sarah is hurt, both physically and emotionally. Max offers what seems like a performative apology without really taking responsibility. It's a recognizable friendship dynamic, the kind where one person is always accommodating and the other is always needing accommodation. What's better to fix a broken friendship than a survival story? This is obviously the film's central conceit, that facing death together will either repair the fractures in Sarah and Max's relationship or shatter it completely. It's not a bad premise for a survival thriller. The problem is that the execution never lives up to the potential of the setup. The supporting cast, recognizable faces in thankless roles. Sarah and Max are joined by three friends, although only one really matters in that it's pretty easy to tell that Adrian, played by Tommy Rose, and Greg, played by Gavin Cossoleno, are the kind of non-characters who don't make it home. This is one of the film's most frustrating aspects. The supporting characters are so thinly written that they might as well wear signs announcing their narrative function. Adrian and Greg are positioned as the couple. Their primary characteristic is that they're dating. They engage in public displays of affection that make Sarah feel like even more of a third wheel. They have a few throwaway lines of dialogue that establish they're in a relationship, and that's essentially it. We don't learn what drew them together, what they want from life, what their fears or dreams or personalities really are. They exist to be bodies, to raise the body count, to make the group large enough that picking them off one by one takes sufficient runtime. This is lazy screenwriting, plain and simple. Yes, not every character in an ensemble can receive equal development. And yes, survival stories inevitably feature characters who exist primarily to die. But the best examples of the genre give even their doomed characters enough personality and
The Devil's Mouth doesn't bother with this kind of careful character work. Adrian and Greg are attractive young people who will die, and that's the extent of what the film offers about them. Carcelegno and Rose do what they can with the material. They're professional actors who bring energy and commitment to their scenes, but they can't create depth where none exists in the screenplay. Booksmart co-star Nico Hiraga is effective enough as the third lead and actually gets a moving moment in which he expresses regret at wasting a life he now worries is about to end. Hiraga plays James, who is Max's boyfriend and therefore gets slightly more development than the truly disposable characters. Hiraga was genuinely great in Booksmart, bringing naturalistic charm and comedic timing to his role as Tanner. He's a talented young actor with good instincts, and you can see him trying to find moments of authenticity within The Devil's Mouth's formulaic framework. The scene referenced here, where James reflects on his life choices while facing potential death, is one of the film's few genuinely affecting moments. Hiraga delivers the material with real emotion, finding the human truth in a character contemplating mortality and regret. It's the kind of scene that reminds you that good actors can elevate weak material, even if they can't entirely overcome it. For a brief moment, James becomes a real person rather than a plot device, and we care about whether he survives. But it's just a moment, and it's not enough to sustain investment across the entire runtime. The film gives Hiraga this one scene to shine and then largely sidelines him again, reducing him back to Max's boyfriend rather than a fully realized character. Finally, there's a diver who exists just to be shark food. This character literally has no purpose except to demonstrate that the shark is dangerous and willing to attack humans. It's the "we're gonna need a bigger boat" moment, except without any of the craft or impact that made that scene iconic. The diver appears, serves their narrative function by dying, and is immediately forgotten by both the characters and the film itself. And a guide named Wart, played by Tame Thapthimtong, who does just about the only smart thing in the movie when he leaves his bickering tourists to fend for themselves, even if it's too late. Thapthimtong, who gained recognition for his work in The White Lotus, brings dignity and professionalism to a role that could easily have been a stereotype. Wart is positioned as the voice of reason, the local expert who understands the dangers of the environment and tries to keep his reckless tourists safe. The dynamic between Wart and the American tourists touches on some interesting thematic territory that the film never fully explores. The power imbalance between wealthy tourists and local service workers, the way people on vacation often ignore expert advice in pursuit of thrills, the entitlement that leads people to demand experiences they haven't earned and can't handle. When Wart finally abandons the group to their fate, it feels both justified and like a missed opportunity. The film could have done something meaningful with his perspective, but instead, he simply exits the narrative. What are they fighting? Once in the titular cave system, the gang discovers they're not alone as a bull shark decides to feed on them one at a time. The premise is simple and could be effective: a group of tourists trapped in a cave system with a predatory shark blocking their escape. It's contained, it's claustrophobic, it has clear stakes and a ticking clock element as they need to find a way out before the tide changes or they run out of air or the shark kills them all. The choice of a bull shark is actually smart from a biological standpoint. Bull sharks are known for their ability to tolerate fresh water and navigate into unexpected areas. They've been found in rivers, estuaries, and other spaces where you wouldn't typically expect to find sharks. They're also genuinely aggressive and responsible for a significant number of shark attacks on humans. So having a bull shark in a cave system, while unlikely, is more plausible than having a great white or other species that stick to open ocean. But here's where the film makes its most catastrophic error. He also decides to stalk them like he's Michael Myers. Instead of behaving like an actual animal, an opportunistic predator that would strike when advantageous and retreat when threatened, the shark in The Devil's Mouth acts like a slasher movie villain. It stalks the characters, appears at dramatically convenient moments, seems to understand narrative timing, and displays a level of intelligence and intentionality that no actual shark possesses. In a film filled with bad choices, the most egregious is how the shark looks and moves. This is the fundamental failure that undermines everything else the movie attempts. You can have weak characters, a formulaic plot, derivative direction, and still potentially create an effective creature feature if your creature is genuinely threatening and convincingly realized. But when your monster doesn't work, nothing works. First, it's never once convincing that there's a killing machine actually sharing the same space as these hapless idiots. The shark is clearly a CGI creation in every single shot, and not particularly good CGI at that. There's no weight to it, no sense of it displacing water or physically interacting with the environment. The lighting on the shark never quite matches the lighting of the scenes it's composited into. The actors are clearly reacting to nothing, their eye lines don't track consistently with where the shark is supposed to be, and the entire effect is one of watching people pretend to be scared of something that obviously isn't there. It's shoddy CGI through and through, which is to be expected. Look, I understand that creating convincing CGI sharks is difficult and expensive. Water is one of the hardest things to render convincingly in CGI, and sharks moving through water compounds the difficulty. Major blockbusters with huge budgets struggle with this, even The Meg, which had a substantially larger budget than The Devil's Mouth, had moments where the CGI shark looked unconvincing. But it's so cheaply and poorly done that it drains any potential thrills to watch people terrified of what is obviously not three-dimensional. The issue isn't just that we can tell it's CGI, most informed viewers understand that movie sharks are effects, and we're willing to suspend disbelief if the effects are competent enough. The issue is that the shark is so poorly integrated into the scenes, so obviously fake, that it becomes impossible to engage with the illusion the film is trying to create. Second, Wadlow allows his shark to act like a slasher. This is a creative choice that fundamentally misunderstands what makes sharks frightening. Sharks are terrifying because they're alien, they operate according to instincts and perceptions completely different from ours, they're perfectly adapted predators in an environment where we're helpless, and they're indifferent to human concepts of fairness or morality. A shark attack is horrifying because it's random, impersonal, and unstoppable. When you make a shark behave like a slasher villain, stalking victims, playing with them, appearing at dramatically convenient moments, you remove what makes sharks scary and replace it with something more familiar and less effective. We've seen countless slasher movies. We understand those rhythms. Transposing those rhythms onto a shark doesn't create something new and frightening, it creates something derivative and silly. In one of the film's funniest bits, Wart thinks he's safe for a second, only to get attacked, as if the shark was just trying to fake him out like a serial killer playing with its victim. This moment perfectly encapsulates the problem. The shark waits, allows Wart to believe he's escaped, and then attacks in a gotcha moment that's clearly designed for maximum dramatic impact rather than reflecting any actual predatory behavior. It's horror movie logic, not animal logic, and it's ridiculous. This scene is unintentionally hilarious because it so clearly reveals the artifice of the construction. You can practically see the screenplay structure, the decision to create a false moment of relief before the actual attack. It's mechanical, transparent, and completely ineffective as either horror or suspense. The performances, good actors drowning in bad material. Newton and Condor have been very good in other projects like Freaky and Deadly Class, respectively. Let's take a moment to acknowledge that the cast of The Devil's Mouth is genuinely talented. Kathryn Newton has been building an impressive resume across multiple genres. Her work in Freaky, the body swap horror comedy where she played a teenage girl who switches bodies with a serial killer, showed real range and comedic timing. She was genuinely great in that film, balancing horror and humor while creating two distinct characterizations as she alternated between playing herself and playing a killer inhabiting her body. She's also done strong work in The Society, the Netflix series that was tragically cancelled after one season, and brought energy to the Marvel Cinematic Universe in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. She's clearly being positioned as a young actress who can carry both genre fare and bigger franchise films, and she has the talent to justify that positioning. Similarly, Lana Condor broke out with the To All the Boys Netflix rom-com trilogy, where she was absolutely charming as Lara Jean. Those films succeeded largely on the strength of her performance. She made Lara Jean feel genuine and relatable, navigating the awkwardness of teenage romance with naturalistic charm. She also did interesting work in Deadly Class, the sci-fi series based on the comic book, showing she could handle darker material. So we have two genuinely talented young actresses in the lead roles, supported by other capable performers. That should be a significant asset for any film. The problem is that talent can only compensate so much for weak material and poor direction. They're able to sporadically elevate The Devil's Mouth above what it would have been with lesser performers, but Wadlow's clunky direction and the atrocious script are constantly pushing back against them. There are moments, brief flashes, where you see what this film could have been with better material behind the camera. A look between Sarah and Max that communicates volumes about the complicated history. A reaction from James that suggests real fear and vulnerability. Small moments where the actors find truth within the artifice. But these moments are exceptions, brief glimpses of quality in a sea of mediocrity. For every scene where the actors elevate the material, there are 3 more where even their considerable talents can't overcome clunky dialogue, illogical character choices, or poorly staged action. Condor especially gets saddled with an inconsistent character who becomes so abrasive early on in the film that one wishes her buddies would just leave her behind. Max is clearly meant to be flawed but sympathetic, the friend whose selfishness and recklessness create problems but who we're supposed to believe is redeemable. The issue is that the screenplay makes her so consistently awful, so thoughtless, so manipulative, so unwilling to take responsibility for anything, that she crosses the line from flawed to irredeemable. There's a careful balance required when writing this kind of character. We need to see enough negative traits that their arc has room for growth, but enough positive qualities or humanizing moments that we believe in them as a complete person and care about their journey. The Devil's Mouth gets this balance completely wrong, making Max so thoroughly unlikable that when she's in danger, the natural audience response is indifference or even satisfaction rather than concern. Condor does her best to find shadings within this characterization. She plays Max's confidence as partially defensive, suggests vulnerability beneath the bravado, and tries to create moments where we understand why Sarah has maintained this friendship despite its toxicity. But she's fighting against a screenplay that consistently undercuts these efforts by having Max do or say something else terrible. Newton makes out a little better, but she too succumbs to shallow dialogue and unbelievable choices. Sarah is positioned as the sympathetic protagonist, the audience surrogate who's treated poorly by her friends and must find her strength through adversity. It's a familiar archetype, and Newton plays it with as much authenticity as the material allows. But Sarah also makes decisions that strain credulity, continuing to associate with people who treat her terribly, agreeing to obviously dangerous plans, failing to advocate for herself in moments where any reasonable person would put their foot down. These aren't character flaws that tell us something meaningful about Sarah. They're plot requirements that the screenplay needs her to fulfill regardless of whether they make sense for her character. Newton does her best to sell these moments, but there's only so much even a talented actor can do when the fundamental logic of the character's choices is absent. The cardinal sin, boredom in a shark movie. In the end, The Devil's Mouth commits the one sin no successful shark movie can afford: boredom. This is the bottom line, folks. You can forgive a lot in a creature feature. You can forgive weak characters if the action is exciting. You can forgive a predictable plot if the scares are effective. You can forgive cheap effects if the creativity and energy compensate. But you cannot forgive a boring shark movie. The entire appeal of shark films is visceral thrills, the primal fear of being hunted by an apex predator, the suspense of not knowing when or where the attack will come. When a shark movie is boring, it has failed at the most fundamental level. And The Devil's Mouth is frequently, frustratingly boring. There is too little reason to care about these tourists. We've established that the characters are thinly written and inconsistently portrayed. But beyond that, the film gives us no reason to invest in their survival. We don't learn enough about them to care about them as people. We don't see relationships or dynamics compelling enough to make their interpersonal drama engaging. We don't even get entertaining personalities that make watching them fun regardless of depth. The film seems to believe that simply putting attractive young people in danger is enough to generate audience investment. It's not. We need something more: humor, heart, compelling relationships, interesting personalities, something to make these people more than just bodies for the shark to attack, leaving only a survival story that Wadlow and his team fail to make compelling. Strip away the ineffective character work, and you're left with the survival scenario itself: people trapped in caves with a shark, trying to find a way out. This should be inherently suspenseful. The confined space, the limited options, the ticking clock of tides or air supply, the predator blocking escape routes, these are elements that should generate mounting tension. But The Devil's Mouth fumbles this completely. The geography of the caves is never clear, so we don't understand the spatial relationships that should create suspense. The shark appears and disappears based on dramatic convenience rather than logical predator behavior. The solutions to problems feel arbitrary rather than earned. The pacing drags, with long stretches where nothing meaningful happens punctuated by perfunctory attack sequences that fail to thrill. The film offers too little tension or ingenuity. Great survival thrillers show characters using intelligence, resourcefulness, and creativity to overcome seemingly impossible situations. We enjoy watching people solve problems under pressure, seeing them use their environment cleverly, witnessing them make difficult choices that reveal character. The Devil's Mouth offers almost none of this. The characters' plans are obvious and unimaginative. They don't demonstrate clever thinking or resourcefulness. They simply react to situations as they arise, without agency or ingenuity. And too few attempts to bring anything new to a genre that demands technical acumen this film doesn't sniff. Shark movies are, by necessity, technically demanding. You're combining water work, which is inherently difficult and dangerous, with creature effects, action choreography, and often confined spaces. The best shark films demonstrate mastery of these technical challenges, using the limitations creatively and ensuring that the craft serves the storytelling. The Devil's Mouth shows minimal technical acumen. The underwater photography is murky and spatially confusing. The CGI shark is poorly integrated. The action staging lacks clarity and impact. The sound design is generic. The editing creates confusion rather than suspense. Across every technical dimension, the film demonstrates mediocrity at best and incompetence at worst. The truth is that the degree of difficulty on a film as simple as Shark in Cave is harder than it looks because there are no locations, ensembles, or twists to distract. This is an astute observation about why The Devil's Mouth fails so completely. Some films can compensate for weaknesses in one area with strengths in others. A weak plot might be forgiven if the locations are stunning and well utilized. Thin characters might be acceptable if there are enough of them creating complex dynamics. A predictable story might work if there are genuine twists and surprises. But The Devil's Mouth has chosen a premise that offers nowhere to hide. It's a contained thriller with a small cast in limited locations with a straightforward plot. This kind of film lives or dies on execution, on whether the filmmakers can wring maximum suspense and entertainment from minimal elements. It requires tight scripting, efficient direction, effective creature effects, and compelling performances. When any of these elements fail, the entire structure collapses because there's nothing else to distract from the failure. Ultimately, there just isn't enough meat on these bones. The film is narratively and thematically thin, offering neither the visceral pleasures of a well-executed creature feature nor the character depth or thematic richness that might compensate for weak action. It exists in that deadly middle ground where it's too ambitious to be dismissed as trashy fun but too poorly executed to be taken seriously.
Almost in passing, that she's allergic to logistics. It's the kind of inconsistency that would sink a film with less momentum, but here it mostly just adds a bit of extra gristle to the finale rather than derailing it entirely, especially once the power dynamic between the two women starts to genuinely shift under pressure. Lana Condor and Kathryn Newton. Performance breakdown. Lana Condor plays obnoxious and unraveling rich kid energy reasonably well throughout The Devil's Mouth,
giving Max just enough brittle charm early on that her later meltdown lands with some impact rather than feeling like a one-note performance from the jump. It's a role that requires her to be simultaneously magnetic and insufferable, and Condor threads that needle competently, even if the script doesn't always give her the material to fully justify Max's more erratic choices. But it's Kathryn Newton, a genuine pro by this point at elevating B-movie fodder well above what's written on the page, as anyone who caught her work in Freaky already knows, who steals the film outright. Newton finds real strength in Sarah's arc, tracking her gradual transformation from the more submissive half of the friendship into someone willing to both stand up to Max directly and take charge of the group's survival when it matters most. It's a satisfying performance to watch precisely because Newton makes the shift feel earned in the moment, even in scenes where the dialogue itself is doing her few favors. If there's a reason to watch The Devil's Mouth beyond the shark attacks, it's Newton's performance. Nico Hiraga, previously seen in Moxie and Sweethearts, brings genuine charisma to the role of James, Max's docile boyfriend caught in the middle of the escalating conflict between the two women. It's a thankless part on paper. The peacemaker boyfriend is rarely given much to do beyond reacting to everyone else's drama, but Hiraga makes the most of his limited screen time. Gavin Casaleggio and Tommy Rose, meanwhile, play the film's obviously disposable secondary couple, whose overly amorous energy signals to genre-savvy viewers almost immediately that they're not long for this cave system. It's a familiar shark movie archetype executed competently but without much reinvention. Tame Thapthimtong, fresh off his breakout turn in the most recent season of The White Lotus, plays the group's local guide who confidently assures everyone the caves are shark-free, a role that exists largely to be tragically, ironically wrong, but Thapthimtong brings a grounded credibility to the part that helps sell the film's early, shark-free stretch before the chaos begins. The Devil's Mouth versus this week's other shark movie, Above and Below. It's worth noting that The Devil's Mouth isn't even the only shark movie releasing this particular week. Antonio Banderas headlines the considerably more grandiose Above and Below, which folds a drug cartel subplot into its shark attack narrative. Compared to that film's ambition, or overreach, depending on your tolerance for genre mixing, The Devil's Mouth looks almost quaint by comparison, content to keep its scope small and its central conflict interpersonal rather than geopolitical. In a year absolutely saturated with sharks plus something else premises, there's something almost refreshing about a shark movie whose biggest twist is emotional rather than explosive. Ranking The Devil's Mouth among 2026's shark movies. With roughly 6 shark movies already released this year and more still to come, it's worth situating The Devil's Mouth within the broader 2026 pack rather than judging it entirely in isolation. Here's a rough sense of where it lands relative to its closest competition. Dangerous Animals, 2025, still the high water mark of this recent shark movie wave, thanks to its bold decision to fold a serial killer plot into the shark horror framework. Sharper, stranger, and more confident than anything that's followed it. The Devil's Mouth, a solid mid-tier entry, elevated considerably by Kathryn Newton's performance and a genuinely interesting, if underdeveloped, central friendship conflict. Not essential, but far from a waste of 90 minutes. Above and Below, ambitious to a fault, throwing a drug cartel subplot into the mix in a way that risks overcomplicating what should be a lean, mean survival premise. Deep Water, Rennie Harlan's return to the genre, weaving in a plane crash alongside the shark threat, a competent if familiar entry from a director who's already made the genre's most iconic film. Thrash, the clear low point of the year, undone by trying to be both a shark horror film and a hurricane disaster thriller simultaneously, and succeeding at neither. Where exactly The Devil's Mouth lands on any individual viewer's personal ranking will likely come down to how much patience they have for the Dead Parents Society trauma trope versus how much they're willing to reward a film for at least attempting some character-driven tension beneath its chum in the water spectacle. The toxicity running through Max and Sarah's friendship isn't quite sharp enough to give The Devil's Mouth real teeth as either a psychological character study or a next-level shark horror entry, This is not the film that's going to redefine the subgenre or get mentioned in the same breath as Jaws or Deep Blue Sea a decade from now. But it does add more to the water than just body parts, which, at this particularly overcrowded and overly prolific moment for the shark movie as a genre, genuinely counts for something. If you're already deep in Shark Week viewing mode and looking for an entry with at least a flicker of interpersonal stakes beneath the chum, The Devil's Mouth is a perfectly serviceable way to spend 90-odd minutes, buoyed considerably by Kathryn Newton's performance and a premise that, for once, doesn't feel the need to also throw in a hurricane or a cartel to justify its existence. At a moment when the shark movie genre feels more oversaturated than ever, The Devil's Mouth doesn't reinvent the formula, but it does find a small, human-scaled way to add tension beyond the usual chum in the water. It won't convert skeptics of the subgenre, and it's not going to unseat Jaws or Deep Blue Sea from their respective thrones. But as a Shark Week watch with a genuinely engaged Kathryn Newton performance at its center, it's worth a look for anyone still hungry for one more trip into the water this year. With more shark movies still queued up for release before 2026 wraps, The Devil's Mouth is unlikely to be the last word on the subgenre this year, but it's a perfectly respectable entry to catch during Shark Week itself, especially for viewers more interested in character dynamics than pure creature feature spectacle. Whether it holds up as a rewatch once the novelty of a fresh shark movie wears off is a different question entirely, but for a single Shark Week viewing, it clears the bar comfortably.